Hello there, world history students. Let's keep learning about changes in the industrialized world. Let's go ahead and click this on and make it happen. So yep, these factories are expanding. People are living in cities. It's a changing world. People are selling all kinds of new crazy stuff. Look at this cocaine tooth droplets designed for children. This is in 1885. This is a wild, different time in the past. And capitalism, socialism, and communism. We're going to talk about all these economic systems in this presentation. Okay, so now let's talk about how the industrial world is changing society and changing people. As I mentioned in my previous videos, working in the industrial world was really, really rough. Okay, workers had no rights at first. Workers were getting a really bad deal in this economy. They were living in tenements, making really, really low wages. It was super duper duper rough being a worker on the factory line. And so workers are now going to start demanding better treatment from their bosses. And yeah, this is what's going to happen. So here's the rich people looking down on the poor. And Hermas says we're workers, not slaves. That's pretty important. And so workers started to do a couple strategies to make it so that their bosses gave them pay and gave them the appropriate compensation for their work environments. So labor is a word you got to know. It's just another word for work or workers. This is collectively called the labor movement. And what workers started to do was form unions. A union is an organization of workers. They usually have a leader, and this leader kind of speaks on behalf and represents all the people who work in a specific industry. And something that a union can do is they can threaten the boss of the organization and say, hey, if you don't give our workers our demands, we are going to stop work. And when workers stop work, they can protest at the place of work. That is called a strike. And not only do the workers show up to their former place of work, but they actually do everything they can to shut it down. And they say no work can happen here until our demands are met. In the beginning, a lot of these strikes were put down, sometimes violently, by the government. But over time, people started to see that this was the only real strategy that an oppressed group of workers could use. So it's gotten more and more of a common thing you would see in society. And I'll tell you, kids, I'm a member of the teachers union in Las Vegas, and there are sometimes threats that the teachers will strike unless if our demands are met by Nevada and Clark County. So those are things that happen. Okay, let's check out some pictures here. So here are some waitresses who are going on strike. They only want to work 40 hours a week because I'm sure in the past they were working like 60 hours a week. So they showed up at the restaurant and they're just yelling at people saying like, don't shop here until our boss gives us what we want. And here are some guys, I think they're firemen or maybe transit workers. And yeah, they're probably transit workers because they're laying down in front of this train saying, hey, train, don't move because we usually work on the train and we want to get better conditions. Okay, and here's people demanding a living wage outside of McDonald's. And here's Chicago teachers striking. Yeah, and okay, I just mentioned this. So at first the government put down these labor movements, but eventually the common people voted for governments that supported labor movements, and it's still an important part of our political society to this day. So yeah, workers want to get more pay. The government initially put down the strikes, but now the government stands with the strikers. So, okay, and now let's talk about ladies. So in the beginning too, like all these things from the Enlightenment said all men are created equal, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Well, what about women? Okay, and about 150 years ago, the women's suffrage movement began. And if you were a member of this movement, you were commonly called a suffragette, because suffrage means the right to vote. And women said the first step in us gaining political equality with men is to be able to vote for new politicians and people to pass laws that will help women. Some really famous suffragettes were Emile Pankhurst. She was a big suffragette in the UK. And Susan B. Anthony was a big suffragette here in the United States. And she's the first woman we put on money. She's on the dollar coin, I believe. And yeah, like some of these suffragettes, they did some like almost terroristic kind of activities just to raise attention to women's rights. And they ultimately got suffrage. I mean, it happened over a long period, and a lot of times people really put these women down, but it was due to their sacrifices and their tenacity that women have the full political rights that they have today. Okay, so here's a famous scene. What was this lady's name? But she walked in front of the king's horse during a race. The horse sadly trampled her to death, but in her hand she was holding this sign that said "Votes for Women," and that really raised attention. It's like, wow, if these girls are willing to do this kind of stuff to get the right to vote, we should probably give it to them. Okay, a fearless, indomitable womanhood, a fearless, indomitable race. Yeah, women, get that power. Okay, now let's talk about some other stuff going on in this period. Charles Darwin, he created the theory of evolution, and it's this theory saying that species take on their parents' best traits, and he studied a lot of animals, especially in South America, on this ship called the Beagle, and he wrote a famous book called The Origin of Species. And in that book, he outlines the theory of evolution, and it comes down to this concept. It's the survival of the fittest. Parents give their best traits to their children. It encourages mating. Also in that book, he implies that humans evolved from monkeys, but he really did say that there's sort of this inevitable path where the strongest species, the best performing members of that species will improve upon, and their children will see improvements, and they're just going to kind of go on and on and on, and that's the cycle of animal life, and it also applies to humans too. So that's what Charles Darwin believes. So let's check out some pictures of this stuff. Here are some pictures that Charles Darwin drew himself. These are the various birds he saw on the Galapagos Islands, and he said, like, look, why do these birds have different beaks? Well, it's because they've adapted to eat different nuts. So he said that over time, the birds with the bigger beaks changed that way over many hundreds of generations so they could more effectively crunch the big nuts. And then the birds with the little beaks, they changed that way over 100 million years so they could more effectively attack these, like, I guess, more precise nuts. Okay, and then this is kind of the path of human evolution. And the Homo sapien, yeah, I think that's kind of a funnier version. And then this is Pokemon. You see that the Pokemon start little, but over time they evolve into bigger, crazier versions. Okay, so now we get into this concept called social Darwinism. It was sort of a society-wide adaptation of Charles Darwin's ideas, because Charles Darwin said that the strongest species will survive, the strongest species will win out in the end, and during this time period, several countries tried to adapt Darwin's ideas to say this affects our people on behalf of the entire human race. People thought that there would be one racial group that would win out over all the others. Social Darwinism is a very racist concept, okay? And this is the concept that's going to be kind of the mentality of a lot of really terrible stuff that happens in the 1900s. So, but yeah, it is this concept that one race will win out over all the others, and it's definitely not a good concept. It's been proven incorrect, but it's what happened in the past. All right, so let's check it out. Here's some people being rude and racist towards a black girl. Here's white power guy. You know, if he has so much white power, why does he not have teeth? You know, that's my question there. And then this is kind of another symbol showing social Darwinism. These guys getting subjugation. And then social Darwinism actually gets built on in the early 1900s. There's this whole fake science called eugenics. And eugenics was this concept where people tried to classify the various racial groups of humans on planet Earth. And they tried to have this kind of hierarchy over which racial groups had more intellectual ability and which had more physical ability and which had, they just focused on all the differences amongst all the cultures and racial groups of the world. And we would find out only later in the 1960s that all the science of eugenics was just made up racist garbage. It would all be proven to be false. And I'm telling you, kids, there's no genetic structural difference in a Latino kid's brain versus a European kid's brain versus an Asian kid's brain versus an African brain. Like, we're all born with the same capabilities as far as our mental state is concerned. But that's what eugenics attempted to claim, and it was, of course, later proven false. Almost all eugenics was this stuff saying, like, white people are the best and white people do XYZ better than other racial groups, but eugenics, totally wrong. Not true anymore. But eugenics will be something that's going to get cited by a lot of really bad actors in the 1900s. Okay, so let's check out some of this bad science right here. Here they were trying to compare the different skulls of people, trying to make implications that certain racial groups had more developed skulls, I guess. Here's a eugenics certificate, and these were actually laws passed in a couple American states saying that only certain racial groups could marry other certain racial groups as a way of them kind of checking people's racial backgrounds. It was super messed up. Okay, yeah, so the laws of heredity or eugenics, okay, this is totally later proven to be false science. And then here they were trying to say that you could look at a person's face and judge if they'll be a criminal. It was totally incorrect. Here they were trying to say that Irish white people were lower levels of white people than Anglo white people, so they were even classifying different groups of Europeans. Here's a law in 1907 in Indiana. The Supreme Court ruled a law unconstitutional because of the due process, but it forced sterilization of people who were mixed race marriages. So it was super duper messed up. Okay, and by the late 1800s, people really thought that it was bad to have children working in factories all the time, because they found out that if children work in factories their whole young lives, they never get any new skills to develop into being higher levels of society. Like, these children, if you work in a factory the whole time, you can never become a doctor or a lawyer or kind of advance through society. So they made a really great decision, because it's my career path, that children should be kind of required to go to public school so that all children can be given the process of, or can be given sort of access to knowledge and abilities that they can succeed in their adult lives. So governments, they're just requiring basic education for all children, so children got to learn. And if you don't learn, then I guess you're kind of breaking the law somehow. So, yeah, but it's the way for social mobility. So people are going to rise through the ranks and live better lives. It's pretty great. So here's a bunch of bored kids back in the past. And here's some kids. They're doing a prayer in school. We don't do that anymore. Okay, and I'll talk about this next concept in the next video. All right, peace out.